So the first step in separating out our business logic from our routes is to create a new directory called models. And inside that models directory, let's touch a new file called voting.js. Oh, excuse me. Let's get rid of that file and touch one inside the models directory. There we go. And inside this file, we're going to do a couple things. The first is we're going to pull this voting object that we're storing only in memory into this file. And then we're also going to create a class called voting that is going to handle all of the logic associated with voting. So we're first going to create a simple interface as to what methods we expect this voting model to have, so that we're kind of aware of what exactly is the behavior that we want this voting model to handle. And the first is we want it to be able to tally static async tally votes. And all this method is going to be responsible for is handling, calculating the final results for our poll and return those results. And then we also want to have a static async method called record vote, which takes in a pizza name and will increment the pizza name that was voted for and return the final results. Now, at the moment, these probably don't need to be asynchronous methods in the same way that our routes don't need to have asynchronous callbacks. But in the future, we're probably going to add a database, and database I/O interactions usually require waiting for that I/O behavior to finish. And so we're using async methods here, but we probably don't need to, just as a note. And so then all we need to do at the end is to say module.exports equals this voting class. Now we're also using static methods on this voting class, and we don't need to do that either. We could have just used general functions, but this is a pattern that you'll see pretty often in certain Express applications. And so demonstrating it here as one way to handle all of the core business logic and to encapsulate that within a single voting class is a good way to think about your models. So this isn't entirely necessary. There's a number of other very useful ways to do this, but this will work for the time being. And so all our tally votes method needs to do is return our voting object. So pretty simple. In the future, we might have to do more here, but for the time being, this is all we need. And this record vote, we can actually just extract the logic from here. And then return voting.tally votes. So nothing crazy about this. All we're doing is extracting the logic that we had in the routes file, in the voting.js routes file, into the voting.js model. And so then anytime we need to add more business logic here, it'll all go inside the voting model. So our models can get pretty fat while we keep our routes pretty lean. That's usually the way it's handled, though I've seen it done in a number of different ways, but this is how we're going to handle it for the time being. And since we're exporting it here, we can do this the same way that we handled all of our previous exports and imports, and just import our model in our routes file. /models voting. And here we can say const votes equals await voting.tally votes, and pass that there. And then here we can extract the pizza name from our request and then do the same thing. We can say const votes equals await voting.record vote with the pizza name, and then send that back here. And so we can see that our routes are now much, much leaner, and we can actually get rid of this as well. And so having our routing file much smaller makes it easier to separate that business logic and our routing logic, and keeps a clear separation of concerns, which is generally what we want. So let's see it in action. Let's say node server.js. Cool. And let's head back over to our HTTP client, and let's first just go ahead and get our votes make sure that works, all zeros. And then let's do the same thing. Let's say post, and let's vote for cheese. Great. And let's vote for Hawaiian. Great. Now let's vote for Hawaiian again. And see, this is still something that we would like to change, and so we'll handle that in the next video. But for the time being, this seems to be working. Our votes are being handled appropriately, and everything is being done in, all the logic is being handled in the voting models/voting.js file. Now, one thing to note here, by the way, is that we could have just returned the votes here, but if we were to change the behavior of how we tally the votes, we'd want this to stay generally the same. We don't want to have to change the code in multiple places. So calling this function again is generally a good idea. It's not the only approach, like a lot of these things here, but it's generally a good approach for keeping our business logic more maintainable.